So I came with a lot of impetus. I came with so much enthusiasm. I was like, okay, so your deadline is in 2 days. Get it to me in 2 days. Identity should not lead to segregation, so to say. Identity should rather lead to amalgamation, which means people should understand that identity is what makes us unique. That's really what connects us, because you only get to know somebody if someone is different from you. If someone was exactly the same as you, it's dull, it's boring, it's mundane.
What responsibility do you think we owe when we inherit platforms that we don't build, whether it is companies, businesses, or even just really maintaining your side work? What sort of responsibility do you believe that we owe to such organizations?
We owe the effort to
Most of us spend our lives benefiting from work we'll never see and from people we'll never meet. My guest today has spent years working in one of those places where that reality is impossible to ignore. And today I want to understand what he's learned. Henry, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much, Ali. It's a pleasure to be here. Not a typical Friday evening for me, but I'm excited to, be here with you and have this conversation. So thank you for dragging me into this.
Oh, amazing, amazing. And our episode today is titled Someone Planted That Tree. And I wanted to begin with, um, you know, from your perspective, what do you think that means?
I think what informs my perspective is my personal experience as well. And I like the way you introduced me. It made me reflect really on some of the things that growing in my career I've been dealing with. And that is, how do you make your work show for you? How do you make the output of your work speak for you? Because there are many times where it feels like the most of the work that you do is more theoretical, right? You're the one building the system, you're the one brainstorming. But when the whole thing gets into execution, you have most likely a team that is supporting you to do that. And as that is sustained over time, it feels like nobody remembers who actually ideated or who actually
Yep.
initiated, whether it's an individual or a team. So for me, I think that's the core of what this conversation is. And it's really, what's the place of historical analysis in the work that we do? What's the role of understanding the genesis, understanding the historical development of any work at all, and using that to grow, or using that to apply in any other aspect of your life. So I think that, first of all, it's a very important conversation. Secondly, there are a lot of people who are dealing with this, and it informs a lot of imposter syndrome these days. And I dealt with it, so I'm happy also to talk about it today. So expect a little bit of vulnerability, so bear with me.
That's okay, Henry. Talk to me about your aha moment, really. When was it you first realized, I'm, making use of this item, and really someone maybe 100 days ago ideated on it, and it's working today, or I'm part of this organization, and I'm part of a wonderful story where it feels like we've forgotten about the founding fathers of this beautiful organization. Talk to me about when was your point of realization, really?
It's very hard to pick one. It's kind of like being all of my career experiences in the past. It's always been either working on something that has been passed down from generation to generation, or building something that would need to be sustained post your era or post your generation. And for me, what made it more meaningful is when I realized that, first and foremost, strategy is not less important. Strategic thinking, brainstorming, coming up, ideation, especially people who ideation is their strong point, it isn't less important. I think it's the foundation, is the core. And understanding how that is so much important in the work that you do really gave me a bit more enthusiasm or a bit more excitement in whatever it is that I was doing. And also realizing that every single work has a person's story attached to it. Like, in my experience, I've realized that if you look at a particular invention, or if you look at a particular work, there's a lot more that went to it than what you see. There's a truckload or a long list of people who failed, who succeeded, who cried tears and blood and all of that for you to have this thing that you see today. So it's not just about that, it's more so the story behind it. And one thing I like to do is I try to be humble and learn those stories, either reach out to people who've done it in the past to learn about their experiences. And I think that's something that has helped me succeed in whatever project that I do. It's not just doing it because I want to succeed in my career, very important, but it's also respecting the giants who were there before you and acknowledging also their work towards the reality you see today. And how I do it is I approach them, I reach out to them and I talk to them about their successes, most importantly, their failures, things that they regretted, things that they would also advise me to do differently. And when I applied those things in the work that I did, I realized that it takes out a lot of, workload from you. It makes it less cumbersome. So for me, realizing that was an aha moment for me, and seeing that impact in the work that I did also was kind of like the result of the aha moment, you would say. Yeah.
Okay, so in context, you are appreciative of sort of the work and effort people put in,
Yeah.
to okay, great. But it's often the case that in recent times, most people don't even realize that this is the case, or they miss the point of this entirely. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I think so. That's been the case, especially the fact that we are in an era where everybody wants validation somehow.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be recognized. And if you're not heard, if you're not seen, if you're not recognized, if the work that you do does not speak in that moment, if you don't make the money in that moment, if there is no quick result in that time, that point in time, it feels as if what you're doing is insignificant, right? So people do not, and one of the things I tell people is, don't look at things as in silos, look at them as a continuum. So there has really been a lot that has brought us where we are today. So, as a result of this societal construct where everybody just wants to be seen or heard, and otherwise you're inexistent, people pay a lot more emphasis on them now, the work they're doing. How do we get it done? I feel I can do it. I have the information and the knowledge. Of course, technological advancement has also led to this one way or the other. Everybody has almost equal access to information these days, right? So there is very little need to want to speak to someone or speak to an individual who's done it in the past when I could literally just ask ChatGPT, right? And I would get all
Yeah.
that I need, but we're missing out on that experiential perspective, that empirical perspective that ChatGPT most likely or any artificial intelligence tool might not be able to provide you, although important. So I think that's really the era where we are now. But it doesn't mean it is less important or it's insignificant to
Yeah.
really learn from historical developments and how things have developed or whatever work you're doing, but it's also how do we do a rethink? How do we conversations like this very important? People who've experienced this, what's the story they tell? And most likely that changes the mindset to
How do you think this disconnect affects organizations today? How do you think it affects building? Like, how exactly do you think this disconnect affects critical parts of infrastructure that supports our daily lives? Really?
wow. So see, Charlie, I think that there was a time where the word sustainability was a buzzword, right? So everybody was talking about sustainability, and it meant how do we build something today that is relevant tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
But the definition of sustainability today it's now a little bit shaky. There are a lot of gray areas around what sustainability means, right? So I think we need to get back to really understanding that if you do not have this principle which we are currently discussing about in an organization, sustainability would, first and foremost, sustainability will be affected negatively. You will
Yeah.
not be able to achieve organizational long-term development. And people play a very key role in organizational long-term development. Knowledge transfer is very important also in achieving that. So if that is not enabled, if there is no culture for that in an organization, I question the sustained existence of that organization. And even if they continue to exist, they would literally be living in skeletal structures, right? Without necessarily building the flesh around it. Also, at an individual level, Charles, I think that it is also a question of one's personal development, right? I think that if there is one thing that I've learned growing is that a huge percentage of your progress in career, the discussions around those are had in meeting rooms where you are not invited to. So the question is, in those meeting rooms, who's going to speak on your behalf? And that is really where it comes from. Those who, I grew up with the mindset of we are growing on the shoulders of giants, right? You need to also learn from these giants. You need to also understand their context and perspective. So if individuals in organization or even in their personal lives are not able to, apply that perspective, it also speaks to their personal development, right? It also speaks to how far you could go, right? And how far you could stay, how long you could stay, because you could go far, but the question is how long you will stay, all right? And I'm not saying it's all and sundry, but at the end of the day, both at an organizational level and at an individual level, it also plays a very key role to really understand context, the story, the history of every single thing that we see as a reality today.
Okay, great. So, to your point, really, you think that this fragility or disconnect that exists, it's a hindrance, but also way more than that, is only ever noticed when there is a crack in the system and people began to realize, oh shit, we have to go back to the basics to understand what's going on here, right?
And absolutely. And I've seen that play out in organizations, right? The only time that we realize, oh, let's go and ask him, or let's go and ask her, or let's go and ask them how it happened or where they came from is when there's a problem. And then you're left with, I told you so. I remember I was telling you, but my words were not really significant to you because, again, you wanted immediate gratification or immediate validation, right, of the work, which is good. But again, there are certain principles that you need to apply. So, yeah, it's mostly the case. It's only when there is a problem that you realize that people then go back to the drawing board. But imagine if you had gone back to the drawing board. The thing about understanding the historical context or empirical context of any strategy or any work is that it takes away over 60% of the impediments that you would have experienced if you hadn't reached out historically to understand perspective, purpose, why of that work that you do, right? And people don't really understand that until it happens, right? So,
Yeah.
what's the insurance for them? Yeah.
All right. Okay. Talk to me about the context of the work you do today, regards to the topic. I think I know essentially your title, but I don't know the details around it. But I know that you're currently in healthcare, and for me, I do feel like it's an ignored the side of healthcare you're on is somewhere that is really ignored in the society. And I just wanted you to talk me through again what you do and that how that really applies.
So it's the work I do is also very unique. I'm not healthcare core, but it's more healthcare administration. And what I do as a project manager is currently overseeing the development of a health care facility or a healthcare hub that does things differently from any other healthcare system or any other healthcare organization or institution in Canada. What we intend to do is provide both mental health, social services, and primary care support to members of the Black community. And we want to do so through an Afrocentric lens. So we're saying we understand the journeys of our ancestors who have come to this land and immigrants as well who have come to this system as a result of whatever has happened wherever they came from. But in doing so, they've lost touch of their culture. They've lost touch of their value system, for example. They've lost touch of the perspective of healthcare through an African perspective, a traditionalist perspective. So what we intend to do is to provide services that is really familiar, to members of this community, services that is close to home and close to the heart for them. And it means a lot because if you understand the challenges the members of the Black community and Arabian community face in a country like Canada, you'll understand the significance of this. But more so to the conversation we're having is we realize that there is no way you would understand the Afrocentric way of care or Afrocentric way of providing healthcare without understanding whence we came from, right? So that is very core to the work that we do. We cannot go forward without understanding where we are coming from. We cannot progress without understanding where our ancestors have come from and the knowledge that they've passed down. And that really is the core of what we do. But then we also think that it's important to think about the next generation. So, how do we sustain the African culture? How do we sustain the African perspective to things and the way that we live? How do we make sure that the next generation does not lose sight of it? Is also maintaining that knowledge transfer. So I think that it sits very, very well to my principle and my core as a person. The fact that life is transient. It's a continuum, and if you don't maintain the flow or the ikigai per se as you go through all that, you would lose touch. And that is why many of our culture is getting lost now. Languages are also, getting lost, and unfortunately, at the receiving end are mostly Africans, black folks in the world. So yeah, how do we retain this and how do we make sure we don't lose knowledge? There's a lot being lost, unfortunately. And I think that, yeah, that sits very well with the conversation that we're having. And in the work that I do, it also shows in how we engage our seniors. So I love my job because it makes me feel like I'm at home. So you have a lot of elders, a lot of grandpas and grandmas who come around within the community and the work that we do, and we provide services to them. But it's also the learnings we get from them as well, right? So that's typically what I do. And I told you a few days ago, we just got our, we just wrapped up construction of our new facility. So we're planning and
Yeah.
seeing how we could even move in. So it's a 16,000 square foot facility for members of this community. So that's unique. Yeah, on and
Okay,
on.
great, great. I would imagine this service is not readily available in Canada or in the US, because it's not something I've heard before, is it?
Man, it's not readily available. I'll tell you something. I never knew how distorted, how full of inequity the healthcare system is in a country like Canada. You will think, oh, it's all rosy, all perfect. But again, work is still being done, which I do appreciate. There is the political will to fund and to provide support and to improve the system. But as simple as having access to a family doctor, for example, if you're a new immigrant, it's really very tough. You have to wait for a very long time. So if something happens to you between
Yeah.
now and 100 and something days when you're waiting to get your health card and all that, what happens to you, right? Many of them are in the shelters. They don't have access to this. And if there is a health emergency, for example, people wait 6 months, months before they get scheduled with a doctor. So that's really a big challenge, right? And if you do get a doctor, do you get a doctor that, for example, speaks your language, or a doctor that understands your African perspective, right? To understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? So yeah, what we're
My,
trying to solve.
my question, it feels like, is this focused on African immigrants? And is there a place for, general Black Africans that have been here before time as well? Like, is this specific to African immigrants only, or how does it apply?
All of the above, all of the above. It is Black, African, and Caribbean, whether you're an immigrant who just came yesterday or a few hours ago, or you were born in Canada because your ancestors were through, the slave trade, were brought here. Whatever the case may be, as long as you identify as a member of that community, the service is for you. But one thing we also say is we do not neglect or push people away. So we also do
Yeah.
have people from other communities, the Indian community, for example, and so on. They come, we accept, and we do welcome them as well. But the core of what we do, what we've been funded to do, is mainly within the Black and African and Caribbean communities.
Okay, great. Talk to me. Talk to me about two things, Henry. What are some of the successes you guys are having, are seeing, and also after that, you talk to me about the fragility of the system that you've witnessed, really.
First is our access, the access that we've provided to the number of people that we've been able to interact with. We had very significant, very huge targets for a very short amount of time. one thing that I learned, again, learning through history, is that many facilities like ours are usually given like 10 years before they get to a certain level that we have gotten to, and we only had 2 to 3 years. Right, with the targets we had, we were to interact with 25,000 members of the community in 1 year. That's our yearly target for interactions. That's an example. But we're meeting that target, right? We've been meeting that target. We've been expanding our reach, and we're constantly improving. We also see this from the feedback we get from members of the community. The kind of services we render is very different. So if you juxtapose that with the number of people that we've been able to have access, we provided this kind of services to, it's really remarkable. And also the fact that we've been doing this without a location, without a permanent site, right? That is also something that we've really been very proud of. We've been operating a hub and spoke model. So we've been kind of like renting and patching here and
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
to deliver services. So think about that. And you talked about the fragility, which kind of informs the work that we do, like I earlier said. We're looking at the inequity that we face in the system. And one of the biggest challenge is the very limited access to very basic services like healthcare. And the quality of it is also a challenge, right? I also speak this from my own personal experience. I come from a society where if you need to see a doctor, you just walk into some clinic and you just go see a doctor, right? If you need to get a drug and say you have some issues, you could just go and meet a chemist or a pharmacist. So that's really where I come from. Charles, I know you can relate with that. But when you come here,
Yeah.
when you come here, you realize that it's not that easy, right? And it's even worse when come from a, marginalized community, right? And that's a big problem. Research has also shown that the Black community are the highest affected by very significant health issues. For example, diabetes. If you look at the data, a huge proportion of those affected by diabetes are more Black oriented. If you think about menopausal issues in women, the highest proportion of women affected by menopausal issues mostly Black people, right? And in terms of age, what age you get menopause. I just learned that for Black women, they get into menopause earlier than any other race. And this is what the healthcare system really doesn't understand, because it's not just about the health, it's also the social issues that we face because of who we are, the social determinants of health, the immigration issues, the joblessness, the homelessness, family displaced, and so on and so forth, right? So the fragility of the system is really informed by the lack of, understanding of this context. And for us, our vision is to become a center of excellence. That's really what drives our work, which means we want to inform that system. We want the system to understand this complexities and intricacy that characterizes this particular community. So that's literally what's been the challenge. And every time we just keep getting more and more people with these issues. And a few days ago, I had a discussion with with a team, and they shared with me that there are even more issues that when they meet folks in the community, there are
Yeah.
more issues that they are requesting for that we don't even offer services for, which is still sad because there's still more, to do. That's what it shows.
But how excited about are you about being part of the foundation to build services, such like this that is really peculiar to the Black community? How excited are you about it?
Super excited, super excited. I have never felt burnt out. I've never felt tired of waking up in the morning and going to work, never for once in a day. And it's because, again, it's a work that speaks to my core. It's a work that speaks to my competence. I'm a system oriented thinker. That's the kind of person I am. So I really do well in an ideation, system creation, development kind of work. That's literally what I do, how we're able to build a system that stands the test of time, right? And that's beautiful. And it also speaks to my value, my value as well. I'm a core Africanist. Most people don't know this, especially because of the way I speak sometimes. And people think that, oh, this one, Nepo baby and all that. They don't know that this one grew up in the hood, right? we know where we are coming from. So I'm a true African to the core, and this work speaks to that. So whenever I go to work and see people like me understanding the issues and the challenges they face, and the privilege I have even, it encourages me to do more, to be frank. So I think this work is, and it's also very impact driven. I've done impact driven work for like 8 years of my life so far, all through my 20s. So this is kind of like, this is in line with that, impact driven work,
Yeah.
defining impact, measure of impact. We're still doing measure of impact for people who are watching now. Always been a topic of conversation. Yeah.
Okay. Henry, really, was there or are there certain aspects of this job that nobody would have prepared you for? And I'm not speaking to the direct application of your skill. I'm talking about what the team witnesses on a day to day. What are some of the difficulties in terms of what you guys see, what you guys hear, and the level of whether it's this devastation that is out there, that speaks to what you do at the moment.
Yeah. First off, nobody prepared me for the diversity within, and I do know that the African community is very diverse, right? But nobody really prepared me to understand or to prepared me to witness the extent of differences in perspective or the extent of dichotomy within that system or within that culture, right? When you think about the word black, there are people who are still questioning whether to use the word black or not. There are times we have conversations around who's African. If you say African, and most have shared this experience with me, it is usually sub-Saharan Africa that is characterized as Africa in most cases. And if organizations call themselves African in a place like this, it's mostly folks from this part of Africa. So my question to my team has always been, what happens if someone from Morocco, for example, who's of a different look, if you get what I mean, comes into this space? How
Yeah.
would you feel? The fellow African will feel, oh, is that you get it's always it's the case in this society we live in now. So nobody prepared me for that. Nobody also prepared me for the intergenerational work environment that I was put into, and intergenerational to the core. For the past God knows how long, I've been into youth development, so I've always been interacting with youths, fellow youths, and once in a while. But now I'm having to work with people who are of various generational identity, right? So nobody really prepared me for the challenges that I had to face, and the need to understand and bring those heads together and make it work. Nobody prepared me for that.
Hmm.
I think nobody also prepared me for, I'm going to say this. I come from, my professional development has always been fast paced in terms of achievement. So you have to do it real quick. There's always a deadline. There is also always like a short timeline and you get it done. Quality,
Yeah.
striving for excellence. But you come into a community, you come into a work where people take it nice and slow. And now it's not as fast as you used to. So nobody really prepared me for that. So I came with a lot of impetus. I came with so much enthusiasm. I was like, okay, so your deadline is in 2 days. Get it to me in 2 days. But they're like, huh? They just couldn't understand what 2 days meant. I came in with, the work ethics was totally different. But my question was then, do I enforce or do I just take a step back, understand this environment and try to ease into it, right? Without losing myself in the process. Well, I did the latter. It's really been helpful. To be honest, I eased a little bit. I'm maybe slower than I was a year ago, to be frank. So nobody
Yeah.
prepared me for that. And yeah, that's where I am now.
A point you raised about offering services in a diverse African community. And funny enough, this was a conversation I had just yesterday, where I was really debating someone about whether or not we are blacks, and what does it mean when you are in America, for example, or Canada, or in the UK, and someone refers to you as black. Because, and I know you would understand, growing up in Nigeria, we don't know ourselves as black or white. but we know what white is, and we also refer to what would be Black Americans as white people because when they come to Nigeria, they are also often treated differently from who we are. And I think my experience with Black and white really came from at some point Hollywood movies, and then social media became rampant, and it just bellied up our day-to-day conversation down in sub-Saharan Africa. And today, many people are struggling with what it means, that identity means, and including me, because sometimes you want to question. I want to tell people to not refer to me as black. Uh, so, what is your opinion on that?
You're bringing sensitive. Okay. Um, wow, wow, that's a very powerful question, and it's powerful because it's a sad reality. It's really and it's tangible for a lot of people. Ah, um, I share almost very similar sentiments with you. I only got to know about the black concept from a personal experience when I moved out of the country, right? In Nigeria, everybody looked the same. I mean, there was a little bit of colorism, it's more Igbos are fair, Yorubas and Hausas are dark, but it was nothing that informed, it wasn't really too serious. The racism, is. And coming here and traveling around the world, even, you really sense it. And I'm going to tell you a funny story when I really felt black ever in my life. It was in an airport in Turkey. They're a small airport. They know it. I don't know the name. Turkey. That's what they call themselves now. But anyways, it was in a small airport. When I landed in that airport, I don't know if I was the only black, but every single person was looking at me. And when I say looking at me, they were looking at me, piercing through me. They could literally pull off my everything just looking at me. And I didn't understand what was going on. I felt a little bit weird because the looks were just so. I spoke to my bestie, who's also Turkish. I told her, look, this is what happened. Can you tell me what's going on? They said those people are not very used to seeing black people. So when they saw me, that's exactly. So they were not looking in disgust. They were looking in amazement, right, of seeing a black person like me. And I had my hair and all that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to feel right now. But it reminds me also of back home when we see white people walking on the streets. You would see kids doing the same thing. They would just stand and looking, and everybody stops. Somebody driving would stop just to look. And it made me empathize now. Like, okay, maybe that's how that person felt with people looking around. So personally, I think that it is a very sensitive conversation. And I want to allow people to identify as what they identify as. Identity should not lead to segregation, so to say. Identity should rather lead to amalgamation, which means people should understand that identity is what makes us unique. And that's really what connects us because you only get to know somebody if someone is different from you. If someone was exactly the same as you, it's dull, it's boring, it's mundane. So that's really my perspective. And many times when you see people who come from a perspective of it's either black or it's white and we don't deal with those people, you check the quality of their life. You would rather not even live like that, right? And that's really what I've seen here. Majority of the people who could identify as racist in this country, things are not working well for them at the end of the day. So it falls back to the work that I do, Charles, to be honest. I think that I've had my own personal experiences. I can't go into so much details. Even traveling across the world, be a black man traveling through an international airport, not just a black man, a black Nigerian. Let's even put a little bit more context to it, right? So you would always be questioning your identity. Can I just change? Can I just be somewhat? Somehow that thought must have gone through your mind, right? That thought must have gone through your mind. So, and that's the reality we've been forced to live in. But it's then how do you react and what role do you play in such a society? Do you play a role of a victim, or do you play a role of someone who's going to be an advocate for something? Which leads to you being a victor, right? And that's what I choose to be. And that informs my work and what we do. It's how do I also enable other people to scale through these experiences the way I scale through and learning from people who've scaled through already, right? And I'm going to give you a funny experience, not funny, but a real story. Many people do not know even that through slave trade, there are tribes, there are communities and cultures that fought the British, that fought the slave masters. And some of these communities even won the slave masters. There is one, I think, in Haiti, if not somewhere in the Caribbean, that is known today to have defeated these people. So many times people think that, oh, this is our reality. There is never a glimmer of hope or never a responsibility for advocacy. But I beg to differ. If through history, again, history, what we're talking about, if through history we've learned that there are people who fought, who stood, who were strong through their commitment and through their purpose, and who won even, it's not just that they spoke and nothing happened, who won through different areas, would really enable a lot of us, right? But if you take away that history, people continue to be subjugated and be subjected to whatever that is their reality right now, keep complaining. So that's the role of history again, of understanding where this even came from.
I mean, it's a continuous conversation, just like, and,
Yeah, of
you
course.
know, there will be debates over what it really means over time. And I heard your point of view, really great. I would know some of those experiences as well, because I've experienced quite a few of them. But, this is really about me. Taking you away from what you do currently as well, Henry, just taking you back to your experience with AIESEC, right? How do you think this disconnect, um, you know, that we're speaking about today really affects the organization? And I know you're one of those with the unique experience of just having been on ISEC International, as well as the national team of ISEC in Nigeria, where you're from, and some sort of experience between the region. Just talk to me about what you think or how you think this disconnect have really affected that organization.
Yeah. I think the biggest way it's affected the organization is you keep seeing history repeat itself. Most times it's not even the good history. Many times it's the very challenging history or the not so good history. People making the same mistake over and over again. And because it is a very fast paced organization and there is this need for you to achieve something within the short amount of time you have, it's very easy to not listen to the words of counsel. For example, it's very easy to not listen to anyone who will tell you, let us take a step back a little bit to understand where you're coming from. Why? Because my goal is I want to do this in my term. I want to be known for this. I want to be recognized. I want to be like that alumni, and I want to be that right now. So what this leads to is you keep seeing history repeat itself. And when history repeats itself in an organization, especially at an organizational level, sustainability again is, like I said earlier, is hampered. It's very difficult to progress tangibly, significantly, if if history just keeps repeating itself and the mistakes we keep making keep repeating itself. Like they say, you cannot do the same thing twice and expect a different result. And that's been the case for many, many, many contexts. But
Yeah.
there are, of course, I would really not fail to acknowledge those who, and I've seen this play out. The reason why I feel very confident speaking about this is as you grow in the organizational structure, your scope of vision expands. So you see things from a more broader perspective as you grow higher, which is naturally so. So what you end up seeing is that there are folks who, there are entities that, you know, turned the test of time or turned their reality for the better. One of the things that characterizes the majority, if not all of these entities, is that they had a president or they had a leader who said, I need to learn our genesis, or I need to learn how we have come to be where we are and use that to think strategically where we are headed, right? And they maintain that relationship, maintain that strategic relationship, because you think about every organization's alumni organization, they play various roles, and one of the roles an alumni association should play is a strategic guide or a strategic advisor for the team that is leading that particular group or that entity, right? Provide them with that historical context. And you see, leaders who succeed are those who leverage this strategic direction. Because there's just so much that an alumni or a group or, mentors could do. But it's also you as a person to take the responsibility to initiate that. And I think those who succeed are the ones who do this, right? And yeah, that's pretty much what happens.
And I agree. And the fact that the organization has an annual leadership cycle,
Yeah,
I often thought, I mean, that has its benefits, but
yeah.
it also has some of its demerits. How do you think the role of meeting ambitions will help sort of limit some of the aspects of that leadership cycle that makes the organization a bit unsustainable, if I were to say?
When I when I started my role leading global organizational strategy, there was a mindset that I kept on emphasizing on. And it is, let us not confuse ambition with direction. Let us be very specific about it. And that was the first thing that I did. So when I came in, and this again came from learnings from history. When I came in, what we think about is midterm ambition. So the roadmap was referred to, all of that, as a midterm ambition. And I was saying that it should rather be a midterm direction. And this is my perspective. An ambition should be shared to an extent. An ambition should be an overarching visionary aspiration we share as an organization, right? And that is already core in our AIESEC way. That is very clear. We know of course, there's a conversation around defining it and making it specific and so on and so forth. Conversation for another day. But that already informs our ambition. However, you need to then allow your constituents, you need to then allow your entities, the regions, and so on to define their direction, to align with a direction that conforms with that shared ambition, if that makes any sense. So the role of the organization is to make clear that ambition so that entities can be allowed to chart their way forward through their own, roadmaps or whatever. And that was a culture that I started with. Let entities have some level of autonomy. And the reason I did this also is their contexts are largely different. Historical development is also very different, right? We cannot apply what is valuable to Peter to Paul, right? We need to make sure that we understand the context of Peter and Paul and what solutions we prefer enables them their autonomy to their context. So that's really the mindset that I kept on preaching till I left my position. Because otherwise we just keep going in one direction, which wouldn't make sense because every single person needs to come from somewhere, right? They have their alumni, for example. They have giants that have come from their entities. So the only way they can easily leverage those giants is if you enable them that direction. The only way they can leverage historical understanding from where things came from is when you enable them that direction. Okay. So I'd always been a propagator of the role of the global body should be a bit more visionary and should be very aspirational, right? But we need to then focus on how do we build capacity for these constituents to chart their destiny in alignment with that ambition. Okay. So at the end of the day, this is what enables that, what we're talking about, that historical contextual analysis, right? That one would require to really develop a strategy, develop a roadmap. And I've seen entities who try. They come to me, consulting me and asking me, how do I build a roadmap? And I said, first and foremost, data, historical data. Where has your entity come from? What has been your peak? What has been your valley? What's the trend like, right? What's the trajectory of your entity's performance? And not just that, it's also the context around it, social, political, right? Economical, technological, etc. Right? When you understand this holistically, that's the only way you can move forward. Otherwise, this same thing you're consulting me for today is the same thing your successor or people after you would reach out to someone else or maybe me to ask again. So you find people maybe in the alumni, for example, who keep complaining. You are continuously asking the same question, continuously complaining about the same thing, but nothing seems to be moving. So yeah, that's my contextual explanation of how things has been. Yeah.
Not to knock on you, Henry, but and recall that I have a different perspective or data to what you have, being that and on AI and would
Yeah.
have much larger data sets than I would have. But I do think that the global direction, it's ambitious enough that I can subscribe to it, or that I could subscribe to it back in the day, or aspirational enough that I could subscribe to it. And of course, there are certain aspects of it that I would disagree with, but I do think that it's a developing conversation. But just taking you back to my experience primarily, I thought that I was able to handle the requirements of ISEC International direction and the requirement of ISEC in Nigeria direction. But it took leaving the position and interacting with people that came after me to realize that not many people were able to handle these responsibilities separately, which goes back to your point of helping people define it. But also helping people to define it also really, puts everyone back to the same. It's tough to, I don't know how many entities they are, probably over 130, but it's tough to have one aspirational direction that everybody can subscribe to beyond what ISEC currently offers. And one of the challenges I would think that we have, especially one thing I felt like I didn't do well, would be that I took all the historical understanding I have and put them into my terms specifically. If I had reflected better, I would probably have been one of those that tried to create a midterm ambition for ISEC in Nigeria, because I think that one of the challenges we have is the disconnect is really a hindrance to what we can do. And if we have successive terms where there is no coordination, or where people, aren't essentially happy with each other, what tends to happen is, this person then wants to let go of what the other person has done, whether or not the other person was in the right direction, right? So
Yeah.
for me, I'm speaking to the fact that I do believe that I was able to handle both responsibilities, essentially what is coming from my second international, and the responsibilities that I know, or that I'm very aware of, that ISEC in Nigeria demands. But not many people could do this. But also, I'm
Yeah.
also making an argument against, or trying to probe you, how do we have this from a global perspective? Because at the end of the day, if we're going to have entities pushing certain information or data and AI consolidate, you're going to have entities who aren't excited about what the ambition or what the plan is really.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think first and foremost, the essence has to be very clear. In my term, one of the biggest challenges my team had was the issue of clarifying the ISEC way from especially a what perspective. And even though we kind of like got to the end of it, I would say the objective was there has to be a global consensus of the essence. And in essence, it has to be clear at a global scale. And that's what informs your ambition, your globally shared, so to say, ambition of where we want to go to. But also to clarify my point is the direction, and like you rightly said, the direction has to be context relevant to the entity. And the role of the global office, which is what my team did, was we kind of like used reverse psychology. So rather than develop a global roadmap, for example, or rather than developing a midterm direction and then say, MCs, this is your responsibility, LCs, this is what you're going to do, we did it the other way around. So we needed then to develop a midterm direction from the user's perspective. So more like a design thinking kind of a thing, right? So that was how we went about it. So we couldn't define a global consensus on maybe an ambition without really understanding the constituents. So that's really how we did it in reverse. But again, I think it's also very important, like you rightly said, that as you do so, the entities are enabled to then develop their roadmaps as well. I've always been a supporter of entities, customizing and building a roadmap for themselves, an MCP. And I have specific advice as to how to do it, because the biggest challenge has always been sustainability. When you're done with your term, how do you ensure that your successor continues, right? And how do you allow your successors their own ingenuity within the work? So it's not like this person has brought this to us and we have to do it. Okay, so I think that's also very key. Organizational development is the center of any entity's or organization's growth, and a long-term perspective is important, right? So we do 5 years, for example. It's thinking from that point, where do we see ourselves there and how do we get there? Every entity kind of like has to do that. So for us, that's really how we went about it, at least for my team. We needed to use design thinking, and we're always about the entity, the network, what is relevant to them, and how do we maintain a consensus that is, their context to a considerable extent.
All right, thanks, Henry. So we've spoken a bit about AIESEC. We've spoken about the work you're doing in Canada at the moment, with the Black Health Initiative. And within the context of your AIESEC experience, I know you came into the organization, and prior to that, AIESEC has been in existence for over, I think, 65 years before you joined, or probably a little bit under 65. I don't know. And I believe that, with Black Health Initiative, you're part of the early founders in terms of people setting the pace on what it should look like and whether it can stand the test of time. So I believe you're in a unique position to really answer this question. What responsibility do you think we owe when we inherit platforms that we don't build, whether it is companies, businesses, or even just really maintaining your side work, because you essentially didn't build this, but someone put in a lot of work to get it to a place where it is today that, you use it efficiently. What sort of responsibility do you believe that we owe to such organizations?
We owe the effort to succeed, the effort to do something, the effort to shift it forward, shift the work forward, to progress. We owe that to the work and those who've also sacrificed the work that we've inherited, right? I think that's most important. That effort, that sense of responsibility, is something we owe to it. Two, because, and I'm coming from a very personal experience, you inherit something that seems to be working or might not have been working, and then you did something, and then something is working. It's easy to have a sense of arrogance, or it's easy to, nothing else matters because I've done this, right? Even those before me do not matter because I have achieved this. They matter because if they hadn't failed, you would have not succeeded. Simple as that. If they hadn't failed, and I'm using failed, of course, contextually here, you would never have had the chance to succeed the way you've succeeded. You will not have the opportunity to be proud of what you've achieved today. So they matter in the entire context of framework of your own development. So we do owe that humility to say that I'm here because some people were, to say that I'm learning this because some people have paved the way for this to happen. However, whatever happened, and this is something I learned from one of my very close friend who's an alumni. He said, "Look, it's not about whether you succeeded. It's not about, especially within AIESEC. It is about your intentions. What were your intentions? If you had good intentions, if you really wanted to see this through, if you really wanted to succeed, if you really wanted to and put the effort, that's all you needed to do as a leader, right? So whatever happened, happened. But what you need to be appreciative of is that you had the right intention. So at the end of the day, is being humble to realize that is what we owe to the work, because otherwise, arrogance is very easy to imbibe or to incorporate. Well, yeah, I think for me, these are like core to what we do owe. The work that the tree we did not plant it. It's we are reaping the fruits now. Need to know where it came, who planted it.
All right, Henry, I agree with that, and that will be all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Charles, for inviting me. This was a great conversation, even way
Was
better than
it?
I expected. Yes, way better than I expected. Just going on and on and on. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. I shared some things that I haven't really shared with certain
Yeah.
people, and I think that really, yeah, that's something powerful. I hope it's meaningful to your listeners.
Thank you, Henry. Somebody planted that tree, and one day someone else will sit beneath whatever we leave behind. The question is whether we've done enough to leave anything behind. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.